My son David texted me 3 days after my birthday. Not on the day, not even the day after. 3 days later. The message read, "Happy birthday, Dad. Sorry, I forgot. You should have reminded me." Imagine that. My own son telling me I should have reminded him, as if it were my job to make sure he remembered the day I gave him life. I stared at the message until the words blurred, and something in me snapped. By the time the sun had set that evening, I had already called my lawyer, Harold Brennan, and cut David off from every cent of the family trust. By midnight, David had called me 47 times. 47. Each call went unanswered. I let the phone ring, and ring, and ring, until his desperation became background music in my quiet Brooklyn brownstone. If you're listening to this, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because what I'm about to tell you is a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and a father's revenge. Let me take you back a few months earlier, before that pathetic text message, before the 47 calls. Back when I was still what you might have called a devoted father. No, scratch that. I wasn't devoted. I was a fool with an open wallet. At 69 years old, I'd been bailing David out of his problems for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. My late wife, Eleanor, God rest her soul, had left us comfortable when she passed 5 years ago. Comfortable enough that David and his wife Clara could buy their colonial dream home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Comfortable enough to send my grandchildren, Sophia, 15, and Daniel, 13, to private schools with tuition that could have bought me a yacht. Comfortable enough that Clara could treat shopping like a full-time career. Meanwhile, I lived quietly in the same brownstone Eleanor and I had shared for 35 years in Brooklyn Heights. Every Sunday, I'd drive the hour out to Greenwich for family dinner. Every holiday, I'd write another check. Every birthday, graduation, or promotion, I'd open my wallet without hesitation. I thought I was being generous. I thought that was love. Turns out I was just feeding wolves and hoping they'd call it gratitude. The warning signs had been there for years. David only called when he needed something. Clara barely looked up from her phone whenever I visited, too busy bragging about her renovations to anyone who'd listen. Sophia and Daniel were polite but distant, treating me like some obligation their parents forced them to tolerate. And I ignored it all, because I believed family meant loyalty. I believed a father's job was to sacrifice, to give, to provide without question. I was wrong, dead wrong. The day before my birthday, I went shopping, not for myself, but for David. I bought all the ingredients for his favorite lemon pound cake, Eleanor's old recipe, the one I'd been making since he was 6 years old. My hands, stiff with arthritis, gripped the mixing bowl, fighting pain with every stir. But I pushed through, because that's what fathers do. They endure, they give, they keep loving, even when love isn't returned. I waited all day, and David never came. Morning turned into afternoon, afternoon into evening, evening into another sleepless night. I sat by the window of my brownstone, staring down at the quiet street, watching the headlights pass, each one raising my hopes, only to crush them again. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, but it was never David. Never, "Hey Dad, I'll be late." Never, "Sorry, I got caught up, I'll be there soon." The lemon pound cake sat on the counter untouched. By the third day, it had grown stale, just like my hope. On the fourth, I scraped Eleanor's recipe into the garbage disposal. Watching it churn to nothing felt like a knife in my chest. That cake wasn't just flour and sugar. It was 30 years of tradition. It was love, memory, sacrifice, and it ended up in the trash, just like me. That's when it hit me. My own son hadn't just been late. He hadn't postponed. He had forgotten. Forgotten his father's birthday. Forgotten the man who had once worked 2 jobs so he could go to college without debt. Forgotten the man who stood in the freezing rain to cheer at his high school football games. Forgotten the man who paid off his debts after his first failed marriage. And do you know what made it worse? I had been stupid enough to expect better. The morning of the 4th day, my phone finally buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen, and for one foolish second, my chest lifted with hope. Maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe he had realized. I opened the message. "Happy birthday, Dad. Sorry it's late. You should have reminded me." I stared at those words for a long time. Should have reminded me. As if I were some casual acquaintance he bumped into once a year. As if it were my duty to beg for recognition. I thought of Eleanor, the nights we'd stayed up worrying about David when he was young, the years she'd spent stretching every dollar while I worked double shifts, the way she led when we bought him his first car, When we helped him buy his first home, I thought of everything we'd given him, and this was his return, a text blaming me for not reminding him of the day I was born. My fingers hovered over the phone. The old me, the soft-hearted father desperate for scraps of affection, would have typed back, "Don't worry about it, son. These things happen." Maybe I would have even invited him for dinner to make up for it. But that man, the pushover, the ATM, the fool, that man had died somewhere between tossing Eleanor's cake in the trash and reading his son's pathetic excuse for love. Instead, I made a different call. To Harold Brennan, our family lawyer for more than 20 years. "Harold," I said, my voice steady in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I need to make some changes to the trust distributions. Immediately." There was silence on the other end. "Changes, Mr. Patterson? May I ask what's prompted this?" I almost laughed. "What's prompted it? Try 20 years of being treated like a bank machine. Try a son who forgets his father's birthday. Let's just say I've had a change of heart." And just like that, the first domino fell. Harold didn't waste time. He knew about the monthly transfers I'd been sending David ever since Eleanor passed. Knew how the mortgage, the cars, the private schools, and Clara's endless shopping sprees were all propped up by my account. By Tuesday afternoon, the faucet was closed. No more automatic deposits, no more lifeline. And I didn't breathe a word of it to them. Why should I? They'd never once asked if I could afford their lifestyle. Never once said thank you. Why give them the courtesy of a warning? Instead, I waited. For the first time in years, I felt like I held the cards, and Lord, it felt good. It took exactly 6 days for the panic to set in. I was sitting in my leather armchair, sipping coffee and enjoying the rare silence of my own thoughts, when the phone lit up. David Patterson. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. By the fourth call, I was chuckling to myself. Where was all this urgency when it came to remembering my birthday? By the seventh call, he left a voicemail. His voice was tight, anxious. "Dad, hey, I think there's been some kind of mistake with the bank. Can you call me back?" A mistake. That's what he called it. Not disrespect, not ingratitude. A mistake. The calls kept coming. 8, 9, 10. By the time I poured myself a glass of wine that evening, he'd called 17 times. Clara joined in with 6 calls of her own, her tone sharp and desperate. I ignored them all. By midnight, David had left 14 voicemails. The first few were confused, almost polite. "Dad, I think something's wrong with the account." By message 7, confusion turned to panic. "Dad, please, the mortgage payment bounced. We need to talk." By message 12, desperation. Clara's voice cut through, tight with fury. "Mr. Patterson, this isn't funny. We need to resolve this now." But it was the last voicemail, left at 11:47 p.m., that told me everything I needed to know. David's voice was hoarse, exhausted, pleading. "Dad, I know you're mad about the birthday thing, and I'm sorry, okay? But this isn't funny anymore. Please, please call me back. We need that money. Not, we miss you. Not, we love you. Not, are you all right? Just, we need that money." Perfect. After all these years, he'd finally said the truth out loud. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, a new sound woke me. Not the phone, but pounding, hard, insistent, on my brownstone's front door. I took my time getting dressed, choosing a wool sweater and Eleanor's old cufflinks. If David and Clara wanted a confrontation, they were going to get one, and I would look every bit the dignified patriarch they had mistaken for their personal ATM. Through the peephole, I saw them. David, pacing like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. Clara, rigid as a statue, clutching a designer handbag like it was a shield. I opened the door with a smile. "Good morning," I said. "What brings you here so early?" David pushed past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Clara stormed in behind him, face twisted with anger. "Dad," David snapped, "what the hell is going on? The bank says the transfers from your accounts have stopped. Our mortgage bounced, the car payments bounced, Clara's cards got declined. What did you do?" I closed the door, turned to face them, and let the silence stretch. They looked frantic, disheveled, like children who'd just learned the world doesn't bend to their will. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked pleasantly. David's jaw tightened. "We don't want coffee, Dad. We want answers." Clara's voice was sharper, brittle with outrage. "You can't just cut us off like this without warning. That money is ours. We depend on it. Ours. The way she said it made my stomach turn, as though my years of sweat, Eleanor's careful saving, and the trust I had built were theirs by birthright. I moved slowly into the kitchen, pulling out the old percolator, spooning grounds into the filter. Let them wait. Let them stew. For decades, I'd jumped the moment they called. Now, they could stand there and watch me move at my own pace. I've been doing some thinking lately, I said evenly, filling the pot with water. About family, about responsibility, about what it means to show basic courtesy. Things like remembering a parent's birthday. David's face darkened, shame flickering across his eyes before he looked down at the floor. Dad, if this is about your birthday... I cut him off, turning to face them with the pot in my hands. It's about more than a birthday. It's about years. Years of sacrifice on my end. Years of taking without giving on yours. Clara stepped forward, voice rising. That's not fair. We invite you to dinners, to holidays. Dinners where you ignore me, I shot back. Holidays where I sit at the table like a stranger while you chatter about renovations, vacations, and schools I paid for. You don't invite me as family. You tolerate me as a wallet. The silence after that was thick. David sank onto the couch, his anger draining into something more hollow. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Clara stood frozen, lips pressed thin, eyes blazing with contempt she didn't bother to hide. I walked to my desk, pulled out a folder I'd prepared days earlier, and laid it on the coffee table between us. In the 5 years since your mother died, I said, I've given you and your family just over $900,000. Not including gifts, not including the house down payment, just straight monthly support, nearly $1 million. Clara's face went pale. In return, I continued, you visited me 31 times. That's roughly $29,000 per visit. You've invited me to 13 family events where I was treated like a nuisance. That comes to about $65,000 per occasion. You've asked about my health 7 times. 7. But you've asked for money 41 times. David opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. No. You're going to listen. This arrangement was built on family love and respect. When you stop showing love and respect, I stop providing money. It's that simple. Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. You can't just abandon us because your feelings are hurt. I looked her dead in the eye. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm requiring what should have been given freely. Acknowledgement, appreciation, human decency. If that's too much to ask, then maybe we need to redefine what family means. David leaned forward, his voice softer now, almost childlike. Dad, we can do better. We'll call more, visit more. We'll fix this. But we need that money, the house, the tuition. Everything depends on it. Everything you've built depends on my generosity, I corrected, folding my arms. And generosity requires gratitude, not entitlement. I stood and walked to the window, staring down at the quiet Brooklyn street. People scurried below with grocery bags, briefcases, strollers, ordinary lives, carried on without my help. I turned back to them. Here's my proposition. You have 30 days to show me that I matter to this family as a father, as a man, not just as a funding source. 30 days to prove I'm not just a bank account with a pulse. Clara's brow furrowed. What exactly does that mean? It means treating me like family, I said evenly. It means remembering important dates without being reminded. It means asking about my day, my health, my interests. It means including me in conversations instead of talking around me. It means respect. David's eyes flickered with hope. We can do that, Dad. Absolutely. I raised one finger. But hear me clearly. If I sense manipulation, if this feels like a performance designed to win back my checkbook, the deal is off. Permanently. Clara's composure cracked, her voice sharp. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? We have bills, mortgage payments, tuition. The kids' needs don't wait for your experiments. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Then you'll do what millions of other families do. Live within your means. David earns a decent salary. You could get a job. You could downsize. You could sell one of the cars. You'll manage. The word job hit Clara like a slap. She'd married David straight out of college and hadn't worked a single day since. The idea of employment seemed to horrify her. You're being cruel, Saz, he whispered. Am I asked quietly. Or am I finally being honest about what this relationship has become? The silence stretched. Finally I straightened, signaling the conversation was over. 30 days, starting now, and remember, I've had a lifetime to learn the difference between sincerity and performance. Don't insult me by pretending." They left my home without another word, Clara trembling with fury, David looking stunned and hollow. After they were gone, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and settled back into my chair. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of anticipation. The next 30 days were going to be very interesting indeed. And sure enough, the very next morning the performance began. The phone rang at 9:15 sharp. David's voice was sugar-sweet. "Hi, Dad. Just calling to see how you're feeling today. We don't ask enough about your health." I nearly laughed. In 5 years, that boy had never once called me about my health unless it was a prelude to asking for money. I let him talk. Let him pour on the syrup. Because I already knew. I wasn't listening to my son. I was listening to an audition. David's voice dripped with false warmth. I was thinking maybe we could have lunch this week. Just the two of us. Like old times. Old times? I couldn't recall a single instance where my son had suggested a one-on-one lunch with me in his entire adult life. The invitation sounded rehearsed, almost desperate. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Inside, I was amused. If he wanted to play theater, I'd let him. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sophia, my 15-year-old granddaughter. Sweet girl, but she'd never once called me on her own before. Our interactions were always polite nods over dinner tables, her attention glued to her phone while Clara dictated the conversation. "Hi, Grandpa Henry," she said brightly, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "I just wanted to tell you about my day at school." Her words were too polished, too precise, like lines fed to her. I listened as she rattled off details about classes and friends, her voice rising and falling with exaggerated enthusiasm. When she paused for breath, I asked gently, "Sophia, sweetheart, did your parents tell you to call me?" There was silence, then a small hesitant whisper. "They said you were mad. They said maybe you wouldn't want to be our grandpa anymore if we didn't try harder." My chest tightened. Those bastards had dragged their children into this charade, manipulating their own kids to keep the money flowing. "Sophia," I said firmly, "listen to me. Nothing you or Daniel ever do will change the fact that I'm your grandfather. That will never change. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandpa." Her voice was soft, smaller now. "Good. Now tell me, do you actually want to talk to me right now, or would you rather go do whatever teenagers do when they're not being coached?" A little giggle bubbled through. "Honestly, I'd rather go. I have homework." "Then go, sweetheart. I love you." "I love you too, Grandpa." The call ended, leaving me with a sour taste in my mouth. David and Clara weren't just desperate. They were ruthless. Day 5 brought flowers. A massive arrangement of white roses and lilies arrived at my door with a note. "Thinking of you always. Love, David and Clara." I stared at the bouquet, almost laughing. Not once in my life had Clara ever sent me flowers. Not for Father's Day, not for my birthday, not even when Eleanor died. And now, suddenly, I was the recipient of a grand gesture costing at least $200. I set the flowers on the dining table, knowing a follow-up call would come. It did, within an hour. Clara's voice was syrupy. "Henry, did you get our little surprise? We just wanted you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for us." I gripped the phone tighter, picturing her perfectly manicured hands, clutching that designer handbag while she spat rehearsed lines into the receiver. "That's very kind of you, Clara," I said, letting her ramble. "We should spend more time together," she continued. "Maybe go shopping this weekend? Get lunch, a little bonding day?" I nearly choked on my coffee. Clara, who once told David I was too needy when I called to check on them during a storm, suddenly wanted a bonding day. I smiled coldly, though she couldn't see it. "I'll think about it." By day 8, another performance arrived, this one in the form of a handwritten letter. The envelope was addressed in Daniel's messy scrawl, though when I opened it, the handwriting inside was suspiciously neat, as though he'd been forced to rewrite it multiple times until it was acceptable. "Dear Grandpa Henry, I have been thinking about how awesome you are and how I don't tell you enough. You are the best grandpa in the world, and I love you so much. I hope we can hang out more and do fun things together. Love, Daniel." I sat there staring at the paper, my throat tight. Daniel was a good boy, but he had never once used the word awesome in his life. His vocabulary leaned more toward cool and whatever. This was Clara's script, funneled through the trembling hand of a 13-year-old boy who just wanted to please his parents. I called David that evening. He answered on the first ring, his voice overly cheerful. "Dad, did you get Daniel's letter? He really wanted to tell you how much you mean to him." I cut him off. "David, stop lying to me." Silence crackled on the line. "I know you coached him," I said coldly. "Just like you coached Sophia to call. Just like Clara rehearsed that syrupy speech before sending flowers. Do you really think I'm that blind?" "Dad, I don't—" "Enough," I snapped. "If you want to rebuild this relationship, it has to be based on honesty, not performances, not manipulation, and certainly not using your children as pawns." There was a long pause, then David sighed. "We're trying, Dad, we really are." "No," I said firmly. "You're trying to get the money back. There's a difference." I hung up, my hands trembling with anger. I'd given them 30 days, but already I felt the exhaustion setting in. This wasn't change, it was theater. And then, 2 weeks into their little performance, the mask slipped completely. I was having lunch at a small cafe in Brooklyn with my old friend Edward, someone who had known Eleanor and me since our early married days. As we sipped our coffee, he leaned forward, his face grave. "Henry," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something. I overheard Clara at the country club last week. She was talking about you." My stomach clenched. "What about me?" "She said you'd been unstable since Eleanor passed, that you'd been making erratic financial decisions. She implied you were becoming difficult to manage. A few women there nodded along. She was convincing." The coffee cup rattled in my hand. "Are you certain?" Edward held my gaze. "I've known you 40 years. You're sharp as ever. But Clara, she wasn't speaking like someone trying to reconcile. She was laying groundwork. The words hit me like a hammer. While they were sending flowers and letters, they were also spreading whispers that I was losing my mind. That was when the realization crystallized. This wasn't about affection. This was strategy. They weren't trying to win me back. They were building a case. I couldn't shake Edward's words. They gnawed at me all afternoon. By the time I got home, my hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from fury. I picked up the phone and dialed Harold Brennan, my attorney. He'd been with me through Eleanor's estate, through every trust document, every decision I'd made to protect David's future. If anyone would know the truth, it was him. "Harold," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone contacted you recently, asking about my mental state or financial competency?" There was a pause on the line. Too long. Finally, Harold sighed. "Henry, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but yes, David called last week. He said he was worried about some unusual financial choices you'd made. He asked what the process would be for having you evaluated." The world seemed to tilt. My own son, my blood, had asked a lawyer how to have me declared incompetent. "What did you tell him?" I demanded, my voice like steel. "I told him you're completely competent, that any evaluation would be a waste of time. But Henry, the fact that he asked, I know exactly what it means." When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the flowers Clara had sent. Every petal looked like a lie, every voicemail, every fake phone call, every forced letter. It all made sense now. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were gathering evidence. Evidence to show that they were the caring family, while I was the unstable old man who cut them off without reason. They weren't playing for 30 days. They were playing for my entire estate. The rage that burned in me wasn't the wild, reckless kind. It was cold, calculated, the kind that sharpens the mind instead of clouding it. They wanted to play this game? Fine. They had no idea who they were up against. That weekend, I made my first move. On Monday morning, I scheduled an appointment with one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Manhattan. A full evaluation, memory tests, reasoning exercises, problem-solving drills. I wanted documentation, undeniable proof, that I was of sound mind and perfectly capable of making my own financial decisions. Next, I called David. He answered on the first ring, his voice dripping with fake relief. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" "I've been doing some thinking," I said smoothly, "about our talk. And you're right, maybe I've been too harsh. I miss our family dinners. I miss being part of your lives. Let's fix this. Come Friday, I want us all together. Me, you, Clara, the kids. We'll talk about how to move forward." The relief in his voice was almost pitiful. "That's wonderful, Dad. I knew you'd come around. Clara will be thrilled." I bet she would. That afternoon, I made another call, this time to a private investigator named Olivia Torres. She'd been recommended to me years ago by Harold for some discreet business matters. "Ms. Torres," I said, "I need to know everything about my son and daughter-in-law's finances. Every account, every debt, every attorney they've spoken to. Leave no stone unturned." She didn't hesitate. "Consider it done, Mr. Patterson." As I hung up, I felt it for the first time in years. Power. This wasn't going to be a reconciliation dinner. It was going to be an ambush. Olivia worked fast. By Thursday morning, an envelope arrived at my door, hand-delivered. Inside was her report, pages of numbers, accounts, and documents. I spread them out across my kitchen table, and with each line I read, the pit in my stomach deepened. David and Clara weren't just careless with money, they were drowning in it. Beyond the mortgage and cars I had been covering, they had maxed out credit cards across 3 different banks. Clara's spending habits were far worse than I'd realized. Designer clothes, luxury handbags, spa memberships, trips she disguised as school retreats for the kids. Tens of thousands spent every month, like money grew on trees in their backyard. They had even taken out a second mortgage on their Greenwich home, without telling me. And despite all that, they were still behind on tuition payments for Sophia and Daniel. But the part that made my blood run cold was the discovery of a separate bank account, one I didn't know existed. For the last 2 years, every dollar I'd given them had been deposited into that account, then withdrawn in smaller amounts and rerouted before bills were paid. Olivia's note in the margin said it plainly, "Likely done to create financial records separate from you in case of legal scrutiny." Legal scrutiny. I flipped the page, and there it was, documents that nearly made me laugh with disbelief, guardianship planning forms, drafts of petitions to declare me financially incompetent, notes from meetings with another lawyer, laying out a roadmap to seize permanent control of my estate. And it had started 5 years ago, right after Eleanor's funeral. They had seen me grief-stricken, hollowed out by loss, writing large checks as a way to cope. And instead of supporting me, they smelled blood. They began cultivating an image, the generous but unstable widower, bleeding money, unable to manage himself. They had been building this case for half a decade. The fake affection, the sudden phone calls, the flowers, the children's rehearsed words. It wasn't love, it was evidence. Evidence to prove they were dutiful children caring for a fragile old man. Evidence to convince a court I couldn't be trusted with my own wealth. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the pile of papers. My heart should have been broken. My spirit should have been crushed. Instead, I felt calm, sharper than I had in years. If they wanted war, I was going to give them one. That night, I poured myself a bourbon and stared at Eleanor's old wedding picture on the mantel. "They think I'm weak," I murmured to her smiling face. "But they've forgotten who raised them. They've forgotten who built this life from nothing." Friday's dinner wasn't going to be reconciliation. It was going to be Judgment Day, and I was ready. Friday evening, I drove up to Greenwich. Their colonial sat lit like a theater set, every window glowing, every light burning. They'd gone all out, and I knew why. This wasn't dinner, it was a performance. When Clara opened the door, her smile was so wide it looked painful. "Henry, you look wonderful. That suit is so flattering." I gave her a polite nod. "Thank you, Clara. You look determined." She faltered, then ushered me inside. The dining room was decked out like Christmas. Candles, polished silver, their best china. Even Sophia and Daniel looked scrubbed and rehearsed, sitting stiffly at the table. David clapped me on the back, a little too hard, his grin tight. "Dad, I'm so glad you came. Tonight's about family, about forgiveness. Let's start fresh." I took my seat at the head of the table, watching as Clara hovered like a hostess on a reality show. Plates were served, wine poured, small talk bubbled like cheap champagne. They asked about my health, my hobbies, even my walks in Brooklyn Heights. They laughed at my old jokes, complimented my tie clip, nodded solemnly when I spoke. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it. But I did know, and that made their act almost entertaining. When dessert was cleared, David raised his glass. "To family, to Dad, for being the most generous, loving man we know." Sophia and Daniel chimed in, their voices a touch too bright. "To Grandpa!" The sweetness was cloying. It was time. I set my wine glass down and stood. "Before we toast further, I have something to say." The table hushed. Clara leaned forward, expectant, her eyes gleaming with premature victory. "These past 2 weeks have been enlightening," I began. "David, Your sudden concern for my daily well-being has been touching. Clara, your thoughtful invitations warmed me. And children, your letters and calls meant more than you know. They beamed at me like actors waiting for applause. And it made me realize how much I've been missing, how important it is to be involved, which is why I've decided to take a much more active role in managing all our affairs. Clara's smile twitched. David blinked. I met with Harold Brennan yesterday, I continued, my voice steady, to review the trust documents. Clara's hand tightened around her wine glass. I also compete. Leaded a full psychological evaluation, clean bill of mental health. David's face drained of color. And, just to be thorough, I hired a private investigator, Olivia Torres. She's very good at her job. I pulled the thick folder from my briefcase and set it on the table with a deliberate thud. She uncovered some interesting things, like the secret bank account, the guardianship paperwork, 5 years of evidence that you've been planning to declare me incompetent. The silence was deafening. I looked from David to Clara, their faces pale, their masks crumbling. Care to explain? David's mouth opened, but no words came out. His lips trembled, his eyes darting between me and the damning folder on the table. Finally, he managed, Dad, it's not what it looks like. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because to me it looks like fraud. It looks like elder abuse. It looks like my own son and his wife would rather steal from me than earn their own living. Clara shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. You don't know what you're talking about. Those documents, you must have misunderstood. Sit down, I said, my voice like ice, and for the first time all night she obeyed. Sophia and Daniel sat frozen, wide-eyed, their forks still in their hands. They looked from me to their parents, confusion painted across their young faces. The sight made my stomach twist, but I pushed forward. They deserved the truth too. I tapped the folder. This isn't rumor. These are bank records, legal drafts, 5 years of planning to strip me of control over my own life, all while smiling in my face and calling me family. David finally found his voice, though it was cracked and desperate. Dad, please. We were just trying to make sure you were okay. You've been generous, but sometimes you don't make the best decisions. Don't you dare, I growled, slamming my hand on the table so hard the glasses rattled. Don't you dare dress this up as concern. You weren't worried about me. You were worried about the money drying up. Clara tried again, her words sharp, brittle. We have responsibilities, children, a home. And you thought the solution was to rob your father blind? To build a case that I'm insane while cashing my checks? Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the flicker of the candles on the table. I straightened, my voice calm now, almost gentle. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack up and move out of this house by the end of the month. This home is mine. I bought it, which means I can reclaim it any time I choose. Consider this your eviction notice. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David shook his head in disbelief. Dad, you can't. Oh, I can, I said. And I will. You'll get jobs. Real jobs. You'll start living within your means, just like every other family in America, and if either of you ever attempts to contact me again, I'll press charges. Harold assures me we have more than enough evidence for fraud. I picked up the folder and tucked it back into my briefcase. Then I paused, turning back one last time. Oh, and one more thing. I'm changing my will. Everything Eleanor and I built, every dollar, every asset, it's all going to charity now. Congratulations, David. Your greed just cost you $48 million. The room was silent, except for Sophia's soft gasp and Daniel's whispered, 48 million? David's face went slack. Clara looked like she'd been slapped. I walked to the door, my footsteps steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Dinner was lovely, I said without turning back. Truly, but this is the last meal we'll ever share. And with that, I left them in their candlelit house of lies, the sound of their world collapsing ringing sweeter than any toast. The drive back to Brooklyn was quiet, too quiet. The roads were dark and nearly empty, the only sound the steady hum of the tires beneath me. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to solve someone else's problem. I wasn't calculating which bill to cover, which mistake to clean up, which entitled demand to meet. I was free. When I stepped back into my brownstone, the familiar creak of the floorboards felt like a welcome home embrace. Eleanor's photo still sat on the mantel, her smile frozen in time, warm and steady. I poured myself a bourbon, settled into my chair, and for the first time in months, I felt peace settle over me like a blanket. It's funny, isn't it? The people you sacrifice the most for are often the ones quickest to forget. I had worked my whole life to give David every advantage I never had. I had given him my sweat, my years, my money, and when it came time for him to show me even the smallest respect, he handed me a text message 3 days late and blamed me for not reminding him. That wasn't the worst of it. No, the worst part was realizing that while they smiled at me, while they invited me to dinners I paid for, they were sharpening knives behind my back. They weren't just careless, they were predators. But here's the thing. Predators forget that old lions still have teeth. By the time I laid my head on my pillow that night, the house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hall. And I thought about my grandchildren, about Sophia's nervous little laugh when she admitted her parents made her call, about Daniel's letter, every word dripping with someone else's script. They were victims too, in their own way. Pawns on their parents' chessboard. I decided then and there, no matter how much distance grew between us, I'd find a way to protect them, even if it meant protecting them from their own parents' mistakes. The next 30 days were going to be hard for David and Clara, harder than they could ever imagine. But for me, they were going to be the best 30 days I'd had in years. Some lessons come cheap, others cost millions. But watching my son learn, really learn, that respect isn't optional, that loyalty can't be bought, only earned, that was priceless. So if you're still listening, remember this. Family is supposed to be built on love and respect, not on obligation and greed. Don't sell yourself short just because blood ties tug at your heart. Loyalty is proven in actions, not in shared last names. Thanks for staying with me through this. Don't forget to subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your voice matters. Because in the end, our stories aren't just warnings. They're weapons. And sometimes, telling them is the sweetest revenge of all.